Welcome, viewers, to Mr. Anderson Says. I'm Mr. Anderson, so settle in. I've got a lot to say in today's introduction video to my mental health content. Let's pause just quick, though, to say hi to my co-host, P. Josh. What's happening, P. Josh? Good, I'm glad you're ready. Today's video is a little bit more serious and personal than most anything else I'll publish, and that's why I'm getting it filmed first, ripping off the proverbial band-aid. So, if you're gonna chime in today, P. Josh, make sure you're not being rude. I'd like to start by giving an overview of my mental health diagnosis so you can have a better understanding of my perspective. First, I'll explain the disorder in more medical terms, then I'll try and explain my more personal experiences with it. I have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, major depression, and severe anxiety. All three have been a part of my life since adolescence. My depression and anxiety have medications that treat most, if not all, the symptoms. Borderline has no medications to treat the symptoms, though, which is why it takes a bit more of my focus than the other two. Regardless of how well I'm managing my symptoms, BPD is a permanent filter over every experience I have. I have a couple of goals in mind by giving you a glimpse into this perspective. The first is to dispel some of the stigma that's continuously attached to BPD. The second is to help people understand that there is hope. A person with BPD can lead a successful life managing their symptoms with the right coping skills learned in the proper forms of therapy. C'est facile, no?
D'accord.
Allons, c'est bon.
Champagne.
I'll introduce you to the basic facts about BPD in a moment, but first I'd like to add this content warning. This disorder deals with issues like self-injury and suicidal ideology, drug and alcohol abuse, emotional instability, physical and mental abuse, and other mental illness triggers such as fits of rage, crying spells, panic attacks, etc. Alright, you've been warned. Now for the diagnosis criteria. If you don't know what BPD is, here's a little primer for you. Borderline personality disorder is a diagnosis based on 9 symptoms, of which a person needs to exhibit 5 in order to be diagnosed. It's a dynamic diagnosis, which is to say the symptoms as we experience them are always evolving in their intensity, frequency, and duration. One person may experience all 9 symptoms daily, and after hard work and therapy, can become skillful enough to rarely exhibit symptoms at all. Relapses back into intense symptoms can happen, though, if there's a lack of continuing care or if they experience another traumatic event. It's always there and it's always changing, and that's the dynamic aspect of it. The 9 symptoms of borderline personality disorder are fear of abandonment, going to extreme measures to avoid real or imagined separation or rejection. Unstable, intense relationships, idealizing someone one moment and the next believing them to be the villain. Distorted self-image, shifting goals and values, seeing yourself as bad or worse than you are. Impulsive, risky behavior, gambling, reckless driving, unsafe sex, spending sprees, binge eating, drug or alcohol abuse, sabotaging successes, walking tightropes over sharks. Self-injuring or suicidal behavior. It's been estimated that 60 to 85% of people with BPD engage in non-suicidal self-injury, while 10% of people with BPD commit suicide. Emotional instability. Wide mood swings lasting from a few hours to a few days, which can include intense happiness, irritability, shame, or anxiety. Feelings of emptiness. Feeling non-existent, non-emotional, no desire to do anything. Intense anger. Frequent loss of temper, often sarcastic or bitter. Destruction of property or assault. Disassociation. Stress-related paranoia. Loss of contact with reality, lasting a few minutes or a few hours. The cause for BPD is not determined. However, there are both biological and environmental factors that seem to forge it into existence. The general consensus is that abnormally sized regions and unique chemistry in the brain combine with traumatic childhood events to create the perfect storm, which develops into BPD. Then you're stuck with it. Sometimes the storm is crazy intense, and sometimes it subdues, but it's always there. 90% of people with BPD have coexisting mental health issues, such as my depression and anxiety. These types of coexisting mental health issues, along with the circumstantial nature of the causes of BPD, make BPD one of the most difficult and inconsistent disorders to properly treat. Whatever you do, seek professional help to find the right doctor, and do not seek answers on the internet.
Hot-ass doctor telling me not to look things up online. I'll gotta look things up online. Hot-ass doctor. All right, what is borderline personality disorder? Nope. No.
The most absolutely vital thing to know about BPD is that therapy is necessary for managing your symptoms. As I mentioned before, there is no medication for BPD, so finding a proper therapist is essential. A pioneer in treating BPD is Marsha Linehan, and she developed the treatment I've mentioned before, dialectical behavioral therapy. DBT has become the most common and successful form of therapy to treat BPD. I promise that BPD and DBT are going to be the only two acronyms I consistently use in my mental health content. I'll post links below, though, to Marsha Linehan's work, but I highly suggest reading her book, A Life Worth Living. It's a great memoir of her experiences with mental illness that led her to developing DBT. The mental coping skills she develops are behaviors that we practice in DBT in order to manage our symptoms on our own. And that is some good news indeed. Something you should know about me is, I am not a doctor.
Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm a fucking moron. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm a fucking moron. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm a fucking moron.
Exactly, P. Josh. I do not have all the answers to borderline personality disorder. I'm just a human who's been diagnosed with BPD 24 years ago and has been living with it since. The information I share in my videos will all be presented through the lens of my own experience and should not be taken as medical advice. That said, if the thoughts and feelings I communicate on my channel ring a bell with you, it would certainly be worthwhile asking some questions of a medical professional to see if they could get you the help or treatment that you need. With that disclaimer out of the way, let me describe the personal events that led to my diagnosis. Once I do, you'll better understand exactly how circumstantial the causes are for BPD. I was raised in rural Minnesota in the 80s and 90s by fairly wealthy parents. My dad was the son of a Lutheran pastor and a Mayo Clinic nurse. He grew up to be a pilot, first for the Navy, then for commercial airlines. He married my mom, who had also been raised by a religious family, and she became a Martha Stewart-level homemaker and interior decorator, without the tax fraud. I was a young, sensitive, effeminate boy who was far closer to my younger sister than my two older brothers. And society had been obsessed for a while with demonizing homosexuality. A while. P-Josh, play that news clip from when my dad was 13, because what his generation was brought up to believe about homosexuality matters quite a lot for what comes next in my story.
The Homosexuals, with CBS News correspondent Mike Wallace. Homosexuality is an enigma. Even in this era of bold sexual mores, it remains a subject that people find disturbing, embarrassing, and the reluctance to discuss it. Yet there is a growing concern about homosexuals in society, about their increasing visibility. In preparing this broadcast, CBS News commissioned a survey by the Opinion Research Corporation into public attitudes toward homosexuality. We discovered that Americans consider homosexuality more harmful to society than adultery, abortion, or prostitution.
With that context in mind, let me bring you back to my childhood. It was the fall of 1993 and I was 11 years old. I had just begun my 5th grade year and my dad agreed to chaperone a walking field trip. We walked about a mile to this cemetery where we took crayons to paper and learned about gravestone rubbings. On the walk back to the school, the parents were all in the back of the group. I was all the way up in front with all of my friends. I preferred to have girls as friends at that age, and all of us were skipping and giggling and singing some song. All of a sudden, over all of the parents and other classmates, my dad shouts,
"Andrew, get back here now!"
I stepped away from my friends, and as I made my way back to my angry father, all of my classmates and the other parents stared at me. Some laughing, some sneering. When I got to my dad, he grabbed my arm right under my armpit to pull me closer to his face, and through his gritted teeth snarled at me.
"I had better never see you behave that way ever again."
That's all he said. Just those 11 words. And my life was changed forever. The rest of the class was far enough ahead of us that it was just him and me walking back. And the only thought I could focus on was, I can't let anyone see me cry over this. I remember every little detail from the moment he shouted to the moment we started walking back. I could take you to the exact spot where he grabbed my arm on this street right now today. But that was only the start of my trauma. That day, on that field trip, in the middle of that road, was the last day I ever felt authentically myself. The rest of that year was spent seeing counselors and taking tests. My IQ tests were above normal, so they started talking about skipping me to 7th grade after I finished 5th. The testing and the thought of skipping a grade weren't the problem, though. My problem stemmed from the sessions with the school guidance counselor that started days after the field trip. In these meetings, she would ask me about my friends and the things that I like to do. Most of the things that I described liking were exclusively feminine, especially according to the context of the early 90s hardline gender binary. Cooking, drawing, crafting, acting, singing, costumes, face painting, all the other things that I thought were fun suddenly became strongly discouraged using the term
abnormal.
The questions I remember most that are still painful to hear were, Do you think that's normal? Or don't you want to be normal? That last one had me crying a lot because, yes, I wanted to be normal, but I had no idea how or why I wasn't. The major lesson I took from these meetings was that I had to completely change who I was if I ever wanted to become normal. So, I sealed my authentic self deep in my subconscious and began building new identities. The teacher often made arrangements for me to encourage male companionship. Before our grade went on that week-long field trip up north to Wolf Ridge, they had me write a list of boys who had bullied me and made sure none of them had ended up being my roommates. They also asked my dad to chaperone that week, to keep an eye on me. The second one of my classmates bullied me, my dad stormed over and lifted him up by his parka and shouted at him in front of everyone. No one bullied me again that week, but plenty of people began avoiding me too. Our school district splits the 6th graders into 2 sections when we joined the middle school, so when it was finally decided that I could be masculine enough around my peers, they told me I wouldn't be skipped a grade. The school instead used my list of bullies to decide which guys could go on Team East and which were allowed to stay with me on Team West. For the remainder of my adolescence, I learned to build different identities depending on who I was around. I observed the more popular male peers in different social groups and on TV shows, and learned to mimic their behavior in my own way. After a few years in middle school, I had constructed many identities that I thought were acceptably normal. P. Josh, how did I describe the inside of my mind when I was leaving 8th grade?
My whole life is... Please.
Yes. Messy. That SpongeBob clip that P. Josh played in my intro video, the one where he breaks his brain because he can't remember his name? I've had that actual panic attack before from not remembering which identity I was supposed to be possessing. Trying to maintain multiple false identities after burying my own is one of the biggest contributing factors to manifesting my BPD. For many of my teenage years, I considered suicide and would draw pictures of my plan. I often turned to alcohol to try and numb the pain, and I became an alcoholic soon enough, which only made dealing with BPD harder. My grades got worse because I was disassociating more and more. I started cutting my arms and wrists as a way to alleviate the pain. I pushed all my friends away. Brick by brick, the walls came tumbling down. As you can see, I had many circumstances, both natural and environmental, that led to the development of my BPD. It isn't just that my parents were afraid of me turning out gay. It's also the teacher and the guidance counselor who encouraged and carried out my reparative therapy. It's my grandparents for sending anti-LGBT literature from their church. And it's every bully who made me feel subhuman for something I couldn't control. And our public leaders for perpetuating homophobia to this very day. Every person who made me feel that my identity, my soul, was an abomination, that I needed to become someone else at the age of 11 to survive. You contributed to my BPD, and you should be ashamed of yourselves. That, viewers, is a detailed look into the perfect storm that is my BPD. Every other person diagnosed with BPD likely has just as many circumstances that led to them developing their own BPD storm. That's why DBT is so much more focused on learning the skills to keep the symptoms under control. How the disorder developed absolutely matters in each case, but it matters more how we learn to manage the symptoms with skills.
Great skills.
This brings me to my last point. A person with BPD has every reason to hope that they can lead a successful and happy life. With the progress that therapists have made continuing to develop Marsha Linehan's therapy, anyone can learn the skills they need to overcome their toxic behaviors. It's vitally important that you seek out the proper therapist who will work with you on your journey. DBT requires a bit more of a commitment than just the average hourly therapist. There's homework assignments, group and individual meetings, daily journals, physical exercises. But don't let that scare you. You do what you can when you can. And eventually, all that hard work really pays off when you find yourself automatically using DBT skills that you had been struggling with and practicing for weeks.
Great skills.
You really do become a changed person just by learning some new behaviors and ditching the old ones. Like I said in my intro video though, if you can't afford help here in America, you can't get help here in America. If you're unable to seek out help right now, know that there are free PDF copies of workbooks available online, and there are a ton of YouTube channels and social media groups that provide a lot of free resources. If you're able to afford it though, you could buy an assignment book like this one, Dr. Daniel J. Fox's The Borderline Personality Disorder Workbook. It's helped me a ton, especially when I was without a regular therapist. It has a lot of ways to explore and define your symptoms and then learn the skills to address them. If you need help finding resources, I'll post some links below. In future videos, I plan to share my experiences with each of the 9 symptoms and teach some of the DBT skills that have been successful for me.
Great skills.
Full disclosure, I still struggle with all 9 symptoms after a relapse due to a couple of losses in my life. It has been a rough couple of years. I'm motivated, though, more than ever to relearning the DBT skills I need to be successful and happy. I hope that watching my process of relearning these DBT skills will be as helpful for others as it will be for me. So share in my journey of mental health as I shoot down the BPD symptoms with my great skills.
Great skills.
And learn to become a successful human again. Tell the folks how they can keep up with me, P. Josh. Thanks, P. Josh. And keep a lookout for more purple videos to follow my BPD recovery and learn the mental health skills anyone can use to ditch toxic behaviors. Thanks so much for watching to the end. And remember, keep it balanced, friends.
Great skills. Great skills.